Hey Wizards, welcome back to That Lab Witch. I am That Lab Witch Talia, and today we're going to briefly discuss the differences between extravascular hemolysis and intravascular hemolysis. What's the major differences is that an extravascular hemolysis is a hemolysis occurring in the spleen and in the liver, whereas an intravascular hemolysis is a hemolysis occurring inside the red blood cell in the vessels. And so we'll begin with extravascular hemolysis. In an extravascular hemolysis, that's a great red blood cell destruction. It's a great loss. And because the loss is so big, the reticulocyte index is going to be greater than 2%. So reticulocytes are going to be elevated. And this is because the bone marrow is responding. So this is the bone marrow saying, yo, what's going on? Let me send some immature red blood cells to the patient to try to compensate the great loss of the red blood cells. And so that's what we would see there. And then the DAT most likely in extravascular hemolysis is positive because of the presence of IgG and complement. Well, what does that mean? IgG, if it's present, we think about a couple of things. We can think about a warm autoimmune hemolytic anemia. That means that our body is creating these IgG antibodies and coating our red blood cells like a glazed donut, if you will. And once they reach the spleen, the splenic macrophages will recognize them with their Fc receptors, and they'll either swallow them whole or they'll nibble them. And the nibbling of the red blood cell will cause the red blood cell to become spherical. So we'll see spherocytes in our peripheral blood smear. And the shape of them is too big to pass through the tiny vessels of the spleen. They have no central pallor either. And so in the peripheral blood smear, we would see spherocytes. And so in addition to the warm autoimmune hemolytic anemia that could be occurring in the patient, the primary cause is typically idiopathic. Nobody knows, right? But the secondary causes of it could be, again, autoimmune. We're attacking our body, and there are a few disorders that can trigger that. So for example, SLE, RA, and even lymphoproliferative disorders. And in addition to that, drugs such as penicillin and cephalosporins. And so that could cause that IgG to become positive. However, if IgG is negative but complement is positive, then we want to be thinking about a cold agglutinin, a cold antibody. And going back to the warm, in addition to our body making IgG antibodies and attacking our red blood cells, there are other warm antibodies that in the blood bank, we look for them using antibody panels, such as Rh, Duffy, KIT, Kel. And Kel being more common in severe and delayed hemolytic transfusion reaction, and RHD being more closely monitored in hemolytic disease of the fetus and newborn. And so again, if our DAT comes back positive in the laboratory, we are going to do now an antibody panel. We're going to run our panel and we're going to try to figure out if we have a warm antibody. What's going on with the patient, okay? And then, so in addition to that, the destruction of the red blood cell loss, our LDH is going to be elevated because of the spillage, okay? Red blood cells are rich with LDH, and LDH is a sensitive marker for hemolysis. If LDH is elevated, then we're going to be looking for hemolysis, okay? And because of the hemolysis, hemoglobin and haptoglobin, they ride together, they die together. And so they're both going down, okay? And while they go down, the bilirubin goes up because bilirubin is a byproduct of heme, okay? Indirect bilirubin, meaning it's not been conjugated by the liver yet. It's still fat soluble, it's still sticky, stuck to albumin. It has not been conjugated yet. And in intravascular hemolysis, our DAT most likely is going to be negative, unless it's positive because of immune. So when we're thinking about intravascular hemolysis, we can think of immune such as ABO and even drugs. Drugs can cause drug-induced immune hemolytic anemia, such as ceftriaxone. That's a big drug that has been seen in intravascular hemolysis. And also we can also think about mechanical issues as well, such as TTP, valves, and DIC, which are all MAHA, right? And because so MAHA is intravascular because of what goes on inside the red blood cells, but because of the destruction and the damage of the red blood cells, well, it has to be cleared out somewhere. So it's going to come over here, or it's cleared out by the spleen. So it begins here, cleared out by the spleen. And DIC is just a nasty one because you're bleeding and clotting at the same time. And so because, this is happening inside, the LDH is going to be incredibly elevated in intravascular hemolysis opposed to extravascular. It will be elevated in extravascular, but in intravascular, it will be much more elevated. And hemoglobin, haptoglobin, they ride together, they die together. They're going down. And hemoglobinuria, because it's happening inside our urine, is going to retain some of that hemoglobin, and it's going to be positive. And in the lab, we're going to grade it between 3 PAs and 4 PAs, okay? And iron graveyard or hemosiderin is also going to be positive. So right here, these two are in intravascular hemolysis. They're not going to be seen over here because this is happening inside and this is happening in the spleen. In the peripheral blood smear, it depends on what's going on. So we'll see polychromasia, which is bluish grayish. And depending on what's going on, so for example, what is the state of the red blood cell? We want to think about what's going on with the red blood cell. Is it fragile? If the red blood cell is fragile, then there are a few things we want to consider. For example, PNH, which we would test with flow cytometry, and if that comes back positive, then that's what it is. But we would see spherocytes with PNH, spherocytes. And then over here, we would also, for G6 PDH, an enzyme defect, we would see bite cells and Heinz bodies, okay? And so it depends what's going on, what's causing it, right? Because even if it's DIC, we would see schistocytes, which are red blood cells being destroyed by fibrin strands that create that fragmented red blood cell. And so that would bring us back to MAHA, but those values would look differently. So the test can be like, well, how do you know it's not DIC or TTP or HUS HELP or any of the other MAHA conditions? Well, we don't have all the lab values here just yet, okay? We're missing a few things, like in DIC, MAHA, right? We would have low platelets. We would also test for PT and APTT, which would be elevated because of the consumption of our clotting factors. And then we would also test for D-dimer. D-dimer is like our Pac-Man in our body that loves fibrinogen. It just eats it right up. And so the fibrinogen is going to be decreased because D-dimer's eating all of it, okay? And then INR increase for DIC. And then so here are different values. So in the test, we want to look at all these values and try to make the connection. If it tries to ask you about TTP, does it mention anything about ADAM-TS13? If it does, then that's maybe more of a clue that it could be TTP versus DIC on the questions, because ADAM-TS13 causes a deficiency for the von Willebrand factor that helps us clot. And so we can't clot, we have thrombocytopenia, which causes low platelets in TTP. And then, if it mentions, okay, so what if it mentions APT and PTT? Okay, well, right there, we're thinking maybe DIC, okay? What's the peripheral blood smear look like, right? So these are things that we want to kind of try to know so that when the test tries to ask us a question, we want to be able to look and pick at the details and say, okay, well, what is there, okay? Let's look at what's going on. Did they mention flow cytometry? If they did, then I want to be looking more at PNH. Did they mention bite cells maybe, or Heinz bodies? Then I maybe want to be looking for G6 PDH, And so there's just those little things that you want to kind of really pay attention to. And and for DIC, the reason why it says, MAHA is intravascular, but it's also extravascular is because DIC is a secondary phenomenon from intravascular hemolysis, MAHA, that is then extravascular hemolysis, because the spleen has to clear out all of the damaged red blood cells that the fibrin has destroyed. And so it's got to go to the spleen. And so it's intravascular hemolysis, MAHA part, extravascular hemolysis, because of the clearing of the red blood cells by the spleen. And so that right there is the difference between extravascular hemolysis and intravascular hemolysis. Again, very quickly, if IgG is negative, but complement is positive, then we want to be looking at a cold agglutinin disease, okay? So that is what we want to, I just want that to be clear, because that could also come up on the test where they'll throw the DAT at you that's negative, but the complement is positive. And then you're like, whoa, what just happened? Now you're thinking maybe intravascular hemolysis. Well, okay, but don't forget about complement and maybe a cold agglutinin, a cold antibody, okay? And so, and then, and over here, I almost forgot, for intravascular hemolysis, the reticulocytes are also going to be elevated because the bone marrow is responding to what's going on because of that blood loss. And so that's what I have for you guys today. I hope I cleared something up for you. I'll see you in the next one. Take care and keep studying, wizards.